Hello everyone. This video is intended to complement the VFR workshops that Keith Smith from PilotEdge has been giving over the last several weeks. The first two workshops covered the basics of U.S. airspace organization, chart interpretation, flight planning, pilotage, and radio communications for VFR flights between uncontrolled airports. Both of those workshops are available on YouTube and in the workshop archive on the PilotEdge.net website. Workshop 3 covered planning, navigation, and radio comms for VFR flight between towered airports, but due to some technical problems there isn't a recording of Workshop 3. This second companion video will cover many of the principles that were covered in that third workshop and will constitute flying a slightly longer cross-country than we did in companion video 1, in this case from Palomar Airport in Southern California to Zamperini Field, and also in Southern California, up not far from Los Angeles. Zamperini used to also be called Torrance Municipal Airport. And both of these are towered airports. The straight line distance of this flight is about 67 nautical miles, so it's quite a bit longer than the first companion video that we did from Montgomery Field to Ramona Airport. But in many ways it's simpler to plan this particular flight. One thing I'd like to say first is that there's lots of ways to plan a flight, and I'm certainly not trying to say that the way I'm doing it is the right way or the only way, not by any means. You may have a different approach that you like to use, and that's almost certainly fine. If you're new to flight planning though, following along with the way I try to apply the principles Keith taught us in the workshops might be helpful to you. At least I hope so, since that's really the purpose of the video. As usual, I'll start by looking at the direct path from Palomar to Torrance, and using our friend skyvector.com. This direct path looks something like this. So there's lots of reasons that we might not want to fly a straight line, even if we can. We might have passengers who want to go sightseeing, for example, but I generally like to start by looking at the direct route and then make adjustments as dictated by the airspace or altitude restrictions or the availability of navigation aids, and sometimes just whimsically because I want to go have a look at something. That's one of the freedoms that we have with VFR flying as opposed to IFR, where you don't really have any choice at all about where you go. So as we did before, we'll move along the direct path to see if there's anything in the way. And unlike the Montgomery Field to Ramona flight, where we immediately ran into the Miramar Bravo airspace, the straight line path for this works pretty much for the first 30 or 35 miles as we head up north here, all the way up until we approach and recognize the fact that we're going to cross through the John Wayne Airport Charlie airspace. And as a reminder, the Charlie airspace is depicted very similar to the way that Bravo airspace is depicted, but it's bounded with a different color dark line. In this case, this sort of dark magenta color or purple color. And the altitudes for the shelves of the Charlie are depicted exactly the same way as a Bravo is, the top number representing the top of that particular shelf and the bottom number representing the floor of that particular shelf. So a big section of our crossing, as we can see right here, right now goes through a section that's 5,400 feet at the ceiling and 1,500 feet for the floor. So if we wanted to avoid the Charlie altogether for some particular reason, we could fly higher than 5,400 feet or we could fly lower than 1,500 feet. But if we're in this range, then we're going to be in the Charlie, and that takes just a little a bit more care than just any kind of free flight. One little silly thing that may help you remember whether something is a Bravo or a Charlie by the colors is to remember that a Bravo is blue and a Charlie is crimson. Well, it's not really crimson, but it's sort of a reddish color, so I learned that a long time ago during my primary flight instruction, and it has always stuck with me. So that's just a thing. Who knows? Maybe it'll help you. Speaking of Bravos now, we actually do have a Bravo we have to worry about here as well. At least we have to look at it, because while we are almost all the way through the Charlie airspace for John Wayne, we run into the the Los Angeles International Bravo airspace, which begins right here with this dark blue line. And as we did with the Bravo over Miramar, we can check what the shelf height is here, and we see that it's 10,000 feet for the top and 7,000 feet for the bottom. And a quick little note, while we're here in the vicinity, is we look at the Charlie restriction here and see that for all of these sections that we're going to be going through, the top is at 5,400, and the bottom of the Bravo is at 7,000 feet. So there's a 1,600 foot tall corridor that we can fly through where we would not be in the Charlie and also not be in the Bravo. And that may help us a little bit later with our altitude planning. So it's just a thing to keep in mind, that even though that these are overlapping airspaces, there actually is a layer that if we could turn this on its side, we'd see that is not controlled by the Charlie and is not controlled by the Bravo either, between 5,401 feet and 6,999 feet. Now, as you recall, the Bravo airspace requires us to remain clear of it until air traffic control explicitly clears us to enter it. The same thing is not true with the Charlie airspace. A Charlie airspace is slightly less restrictive than a Bravo. You must have established and maintain communications with air traffic control before you enter a Charlie airspace. But if you are in communication with air traffic control and they have not explicitly told you to stay out of the Charlie, then you are allowed to fly through it. That's worth saying one more time. If you are in communication with air traffic control, if you have established communications with them and are maintaining continuous communications, and they have not explicitly told you to stay out of the Charlie, then you may fly through it without any further clearances. So along our route here, if we are in communication with air traffic control outside this Charlie, and then they don't tell us to stay out of it, we can continue to fly right along our path here. Now, if we happen to be above 7,000 feet, we would not be able to continue past this point right here, because that is the border of the Bravo, and that space begins at 7,000 feet. So if we were flying along here at 8,500 feet, then, although in that particular case we'd be over the top of the Charlie, we would not be allowed to enter into this space unless we had explicit clearance from air traffic control. That's a very important thing to be utterly clear about, is what happens at the boundary of a Bravo versus what happens at the boundary of a Charlie. Now, one thing to remember from if you watch the Workshop 3 companion video, you'll recall that we started off with a pretty simple L-shaped path from Montgomery Field to Ramona, and then we had to modify it a bit because there weren't any great visual landmarks along the path, and so we had to modify our flight path so that we had some easy-to-see visual landmarks to tell us when to make our turns. We're in much better shape from that perspective for this flight, because if we keep the blue stuff to the left and the brown and green stuff to the right, we pretty much can't go very wrong. The ocean out there on our left side and the land on our right is about as good of a visual distinction as you're going to make, and should make it pretty easy for us to keep going in the right direction. And just by the way, it turns out that if you're navigating from the sectional or the tack chart like this one, the populated areas aren't actually painted yellow. That was really disappointing to me, but you can't count on that. They're not actually yellow. So in this particular case, if we were just going to fly a straight path from Palomar to Torrance, assuming we know what to do with the Class Charlie airspace, this actually can be a straight line. There's really nothing in our way that prevents us from flying that particular path. Now, there are a couple of small details that are worth fine-tuning when we come, and we'll come back to that in just a second. But first of all, let's do our altitude planning and decide what altitude that we're going to fly at here. So we've already made note of the fact that the Class Bravo airspace for Los Angeles, once we get past John Wayne Airport here, begins with its floor at 7,000 feet. And we surely don't want to even try to go over the top of that. That really doesn't make any sense at all to try to climb up to, say, 10,500 feet for the to go over the top of the Bravo. So right away our altitude, we can make a very good guess that we're going to be flying below 7,000 feet for this flight from Palomar to Torrance Airport. The Bravo itself dictates that that's the better altitude. Now, what about the Charlie? Is there any particular reason that we should worry about trying to go underneath this Charlie or over the top of this Charlie? Well, let's put that thought on pause for just a second and now go back for a moment to the VFR cruising altitude rules. Remember that on the companion video between Montgomery Field and Ramona, we decided the VFR cruising altitude rules didn't come into play because our flight was never above 3,000 feet AGL. On this particular flight, particularly since we're flying over the ocean, 3,000 feet MSL and 3,000 feet AGL are pretty close to the same thing. So we certainly could fly at 3,000 feet or lower along this route of flight. And it would depend entirely upon what our objectives of the flight were. If we were truly just doing sightseeing all the way up along the coastline, it might be a great idea to fly really low, to fly at 1,500 feet or even 1,000 feet. And then get really good views of stuff in along the shoreline. And if we did that, then that would let us go completely under the Charlie and then go ahead and make our approach into Torrance. We'd want to check the altitude for Torrance, the pattern altitude, but we can see just by looking at the sectional chart here that Zamperini is at 103 feet, so that means we're going to have a pattern altitude of maybe 1,000 foot above that, so call it 1,100 feet. So heck, we could fly the entire flight at 1,100 feet possibly, and that might be okay. There's one concern that I personally would have about that, flying a single-engine piston aircraft, is that if we were flying this route, we're going to be offshore by, this looks like maybe as much as a couple of miles in some places, maybe even 3 miles in a few places. And if the engine coughs and then stops working, we are going to have to glide back to land and depend a lot on the aircraft. But a normal Cessna 172 with a glide ratio of about 9-to-1 or something like that, from 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet, we are not going to make 3 miles back to shore. So although that's not a gigantic consideration, it's a pretty serious consequence if the engine does quit and we're that far offshore and we don't have enough altitude to glide back. So since that's the way I personally feel about it, I would not plan this flight to go that low for that particular reason. There might be a couple of places where I might decide to go down quite low and have a look at some interesting things along the route, but mostly I'm going to plan for a little bit higher. So how much higher? Well, if we're going to use one of the VFR cruising altitudes, the first westbound altitude actually doesn't start until 4,500 feet. Because westbound, if you remember, is an even 1,000 plus 500 feet. 2,500 feet sounds like a VFR cruising altitude, but it's below 3,000 feet AGL, so it's not actually one of the VFR cruise altitudes. So the first one we come to is 4,500 feet, the next one is 6,500 feet, and then the third option is 8,500 feet. Well, we already ruled out 8,500 feet because of the Los Angeles Bravo. We want to be below 7,000 feet, so that doesn't come into play for us. And also, that's an awfully long way to climb up for such a short flight, and the scenery won't be as nice from that altitude, and there's just lots of reasons why I wouldn't pick 8,500 feet. So how about 6,500? Well, 6,500 has the redeeming characteristic of it doesn't take all that long to climb to that. It takes us completely above the John Wayne Class C airport or airspace, so we wouldn't have to fiddle with that. And it is still well below the floor of the Alpha. We would have to, once we cross over the Charlie, we would have to hurry down just a little bit. With the pattern altitude of 1,100 feet here, it might be pretty reasonable to be, say, at 2,000 feet over the Long Beach Harbor here. That'd probably be a pretty good goal, to be down around that altitude, and then descend lower to the pattern altitude. Also, we probably can expect a straight in to runway 29 right, assuming that the winds are sort of in the normal condition and that the airport is not itself too busy. It's not unusual at all to get a straight in to runway 29 right or 29 left from over the Long Beach Harbor when you're inbound from that direction. It actually just makes sense to do that. It would make very little sense if the airport was not busy to force you to perhaps overfly the airport and then enter a pattern over here, or widen out and do some weird 45-degree entry off from way out here over Hawthorne Airport or something like that. So we can pretty much expect this to be, under normal circumstances, a very easy flight where we go straight for a great deal of the flight from one airport to the other. So a choice of 6,500 feet for the altitude, assuming that we are not uncomfortable with a pretty good rate of descent from the time we get past the Charlie until we reach Long Beach Harbor. And just if we wanted to check, we could see exactly how far that was. So that's 11 miles. That's not a in a 120 knot airplane. That's just a little bit over 5 minutes. So if we have to descend from 6,500 feet to 2,000 feet, 4,500 feet in 5 minutes, that's not quite even 1,000 feet a minute, and so that's not an outrageously fast descent at all, just to do some quick back-of-the-envelope calculations or estimations there. So 6,500 feet is a completely viable altitude. Now, how about 4,500 feet? Well, it's a faster climb up to that altitude. It's an easier descent. We only got 2,500 feet we have to descend to get to a target of 2,000 by the time we're over the Long Beach Harbor. And it's a little lower to the ground, so that means the scenery will be a little nicer. And so really either of those altitudes that appeals to you for whatever reason is fine. 6,500 feet has the advantage of we have lots of gliding room if our engine fails on us while we're out here offshore. But 4,500 feet is plenty as well. That would actually allow us quite easily to make it to the shore in a standard single engine airplane with a roughly 9-to-1 glide ratio. So for purposes of this particular flight, when I do the demo, I'm just going to elect to fly at 4,500 feet. And because I'm making that decision now the Charlie airspace does come into play. So what would I have to do in order to be able to fly through that Charlie legally? We'll return to what I said earlier now. We have to establish contact and maintain contact with air traffic control prior to entering the Charlie airspace. Well, if we're going to have to do that, why don't we take advantage of the fact that flight following is available to us out of well, really anywhere in the SoCal, the ZLA airspace, just about. As long as ATC is not busy, we can get flight following. And flight following is a wonderful thing to have as far as I'm personally concerned. When you are under flight following, you get traffic advisories, you get safety alerts, you get if there's any significant changes in the weather, they notify you about those. And if you have a problem with your aircraft or of anything of any sort, you are talking to ATC already. You do not have to fumble for frequencies, you don't have to go searching. So if there's an emergency, you right on the spot are already talking to the guys who can possibly help you out. So flight following, I think, is a terrific idea, and it's incredibly simple to get. You need a transponder-equipped airplane, preferably with Mode C. Actually, I'm not positive if that is a requirement or not for Mode C. We'll have to query Keith about that one. But the essence of how you get flight following is simply to to contact either SoCal or clearance delivery, or call the flight service station, or in some cases you can even initiate it with ground control at some airports. Tell them who you are, tell them what you want to do and where you're going, and they will, if they're on a workload permitting basis, which means most of the time, particularly on the PilotEdge network, that means they will then assign you a squawk code, and away you go. And there's not much more to it then, except to stay on the frequencies that they tell you to be on, and listen to any particular advisories that they give you. And similarly, you advise them if you're altering in any way from the plan that you had in mind, or if you're going to change the altitudes that you're flying, and so forth. So we can pick up flight following on the ground at Palomar. It happens to be available there. But for purposes of showing how this works in the air, we'll go ahead and hold off on getting our flight following going until we have departed the Palomar Airport and are established on our course northbound. In this particular flight, using flight following also has another really significant advantage. Remember earlier that the requirement for flying through the Charlie or entering the Charlie is that we have established and maintained communications with ATC before entering that airspace. And as long as ATC hasn't explicitly told us to stay out of the airspace, we can fly through it. Well, flight following, which is with SoCal, TRACON, is the party who owns that Charlie airspace. They also own the Los Angeles Bravo. So by talking to them from the time or shortly after the time we leave the Palomar Airport, we have met the requirement for being in communication with ATC, and unless they tell us to stay out of the Santa Ana, the John Wayne Charlie for some reason, then we can just treat the Charlie as if it didn't exist. So again, that's worth saying again. If we are in communication with ATC from the time that we leave the Palomar Airport or shortly thereafter, anytime really before we enter the Charlie, unless they explicitly tell us to stay out of the Charlie, it doesn't exist for it, and we can just fly along our planned route of flight that we have right here. So multiple great reasons for using flight following, and we're definitely going to do that on this flight, and I would encourage you to use it for any of your cross countries where flight following is available. There's really no downside at all to using it. So let's do now just one last bit of fine-tuning for this particular flight plan, and switch over to the San Diego TAC chart for this and zoom in a bit. So one thing to note as we follow our path as we have it depicted right now out of the Palomar Airport is that we clip the edge of something that doesn't look completely like normal airspace, and indeed it's not. This hashed blue area here, it's sort of this weird shape, represents a restricted area. That is airspace that we may not enter without explicit permission to do so. And there's a whole bunch of reasons restricted airspaces exist. Some of them are for safety reasons for the pilots because of unpleasant things like live ammunition going on in here. Some of them are for security reasons, but whatever the reason that the restricted area exists, if we don't have permission, we can't go in it, and it is a very serious offense to bust a restricted area. Serious to the extent of you could get fighter jets intercepted to help you find your way back out of the airspace and then down to the nearest airport, where they will have some very blunt questions for you. So one of the very first things that we want to do is to figure out, well, we are going right by the edge of this this restricted airspace, and we're flying not that far offshore from it. The prevailing, so if we're flying a heading, if we picked a heading of whatever this happens to be, let's see, 293 to the northwest here, and we've got a strong onshore breeze that's blowing from west towards the east, and all we're doing is flying a heading, we could easily, by the time particularly we got up to the north here, have drifted over into this restricted airspace and not even been aware of it. So because remember, you can see here that this airspace extends to a mile or so offshore. So that personally makes me just a little nervous that we're coming that close to that restricted airspace. One of the things, though, that we do need to check is whether or not that airspace is active, because not all restricted airspaces are active 24 hours a day. So this happens to be R2503 Alpha and Delta. They are coincident. The same area is has two different designations, and that's almost certainly because that there's two different altitudes at play here, or two different active times. But the only way we can know for sure is to go look at the legend, and this is called special use airspace. And so here's what we're looking for is the legend on the chart for special use airspace. And here we note the very first one is restricted 2503 Alpha, which is from the surface to 2,000 feet, and is active between 0600 and 2400, so from basically 6 in the morning until midnight. And since we're not going to be flying after midnight and before 6 a.m., we can have to treat 2503 Alpha as active for our flight. Our 2503 Delta is from 2,000 to 11,000, so it starts immediately above the Alpha restricted area and goes up to 11,000 feet. But it's only active by NOTAM, by Notice to Airmen, with 24 hours advance notice. So if we do any kind of flight planning through flight services, or when we're on the ground and we talk to SoCal, we can find out whether the restricted area is active or hot, as it's sometimes called, or not. And if it is not, then we would be okay. As long as we were above 2,000 feet, we would be okay actually to fly through restricted 2503 Delta. Now, for purposes of this particular cross-country, though, let's pretend that this restricted airspace is restricted all the time and that we are not allowed to fly through it. So let's make a plan for how we would avoid that airspace so that we don't even have any chance at all of violating it. And as we discussed a little bit ago, just flying a heading is not really the greatest plan. That would not be my plan A, particularly if the winds were out of the west and were blowing me toward that. I mean, I probably could stay outside of it, but I would feel a lot more confident if I had a positive way that I could be sure that I was outside of that airspace until I was far enough north that it wasn't a factor anymore. So how can we do that? Well, one thing to note right off is that when we aren't going to immediately take off from this from Palomar Airport and honk a big right turn and head straight. You know, we're going to be flying a little bit out on the runway heading for a ways. And if we flew out here to the shoreline and then made a right turn, let's just see what that looked like. That would take us definitely clear of we wouldn't have any possibility of clipping that corner, and the odds are good that we would miss it the whole way up here. But once again, I'm not crazy about doing it that way because I don't have any absolute mechanism to tell me that I'm clear of that airspace, and I'd like to have one. So what can we do? Well, if we have a GPS in the cockpit, then that's pretty easy. All moving map kinds of GPSs depict restricted airspaces, and it would be very easy for us to verify that we were staying west of that airspace by just watching our moving map display. But what if we don't have a GPS in the airplane, but we do have VORs? So how about if we were to use the radial off of some VOR to help us remain clear of this particular little restricted area? Well, oceanside VOR is not going to help us because it's butted up right along to the very edge of this airspace, and there's pretty much no radial we could track that heads in the northwest direction that we want to go that's going to help us from oceanside VOR. So let's just didn't mean to do that. Let's just have a look a little bit further to the north, and we'll switch back here to the sectional chart now. How about Catalina VOR? Well, that's a possibility, but we really don't want to fly all the way out to Catalina just to go around this little bitty airspace. So that's probably not our best choice either. But how about here? We've got Seal Beach VOR. So the Seal Beach VOR, if we were to drop our a waypoint there and then have a look, we can see, well, that's pretty darn close. This particular route we've got right now clips the edge of it, and so we don't want that. But if we just take our runway heading a little bit further out before we make our turn to the northwest, and maybe even we can do a little bit less conservative than that. This looks about right. This is about a 4 or 5 mile segment that we're going to be flying from the airport, so it's perhaps 3 miles offshore, We'll be climbing to the altitude we decided, which is 4,500 feet. If the engine quits, we have time anywhere along this path. Because we're continuously climbing, we can turn around and return to McLelland Airport. The path of the 308 radial from Seal Beach here takes us well clear of the restricted airspace. And look at that, it just happens to cross right over Dana Point, which is a very good visual reference, as we'll see when we actually fly this. It's a very easy landmark to see. There is a little hard to see on this chart. Let's switch over to the TAC chart. And there's a very distinctive marina there at Dana Point, which makes this a terrific reporting point. And as it happens, it is a visual reporting point. That's what this little magenta flag indicates. So why don't we go ahead and we'll drop a planning point there. And what's useful now about Dana Point is it gives us a place that visually we can see along our route of flight, that then lets us say, okay, we can now quit flying the radial 308 because we are definitely clear of the restricted area by the time we reach Dana Point. And at that point now, we can just go ahead and go direct pretty much to the Torrance Airport at that point, and head for the Long Beach Harbor, which is a terrific place that we can do our check-in, and transition to the tower for Torrance Airport. We'll be about, looks like about 7 miles from the airport at that point. And we will still be outside their delta. Now it's going to turn out that isn't going to matter because we're talking to, we're going to be talking to flight following. So we'll be handed over to the tower by SoCal approach as we get there, but it'll probably be around the harbor at the point where that happens. And if we take a look on the TAC chart here, we can see that there's a bunch of different reporting points that are available to us here. The Queen Mary is here. The little white dome that represents the Spruce Goose is there. We've got two very visible sort of spits of land and docking areas, one called Queen's Gate, one called Angel's Gate. And anything in this area that we can report, the Torrance Tower is going to know exactly where we are, and then hopefully can clear us for a straight in. So with that last little bit of tuning here, go back out to the sectional for just a second. I think we have our plan for how we're going to fly this. We will depart Palomar Airport, request a straight out departure. We'll head out, we will tune while we're on the ground to the Seal Beach VOR, which we will probably not be able to receive while we're on the ground. So one of the things we want to do is, as we're climbing, is have our audio for nav 1 turned on so that we can listen for the Morse code identifier for Seal Beach. And as soon as we hear it, then we will know that we're can use that radial 308 to make our right turn to the northwest. We probably will be receiving DME if we have that in the airplane, which we will have in the airplane we're going to fly. We can just take 308 north, watching for Dana Point, which we will spot pretty easily. There is another visual landmark that we'll be able to see very easily, which is the San Onofre Power Plant. It's a nuclear reactor with a very distinct cooling tower, as most nuclear power plants have. It is not quite at the end of the restricted area yet, but it will signal us when we see it off of our wing on the right that we're getting close to being clear, and by that point we will easily have Dana Point in sight. At that point we can quit flying the 308 radial into Seal Beach, make a left turn to 290 heading or thereabouts. We will still be talking to flight following, so we're fine to go ahead and cross through the Charlie airspace. Then shortly after we cross through the Charlie, we can descend down to a good target altitude would be about 2,000 feet over the harbor here. I think we may have mentioned that earlier. And then hopefully just get a straight-in approach into runway 29 right, and our little adventure will come to a glorious conclusion. So that looks like our plan. So let's go ahead and fly it. Here we are on the ground at Palomar Airport for the flying segment of the video. One note I want to make up front is that the screen recording you're seeing isn't all that I'm seeing in my simulated cockpit. This is a picture of my setup. My display setup gives me about a 180-degree field of view. I'm showing you this so you'll understand why I don't pan my camera view as often as you'd have to with just a single monitor, and to explain in advance why you sometimes might not see the camera move when ATC calls out traffic. If you hear me saying I'm looking for it, I really am looking for it, but I'm just turning my head rather than panning the view. Let's go ahead and check the ATIS here at Palomar.
Palomar Airport information, Lima 00002. Wind calm, visibility greater than 20 miles. Sky conditions, few clouds at 5,700. Temperature 15.5. Altimeter 2992. ILS, runway 24 continues. Landing and departing, runway 24. VFR aircraft, steady direction of flight. All aircraft read back with short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact. You have Lima.
I have already preset my NAV1 receiver for Seal Beach VOR and set the OBS for the 308 radial. We aren't receiving Seal Beach VOR on the ground here, so we'll have to identify it in the air before using the radial to help us avoid the restricted area. Let's also preset Palomar Tower as our standby frequency. And we're all set up now, so let's give ground control a call and get going. Palomar ground, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike.
Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, Palomar ground, go ahead.
Palomar ground, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike. We're on the south ramp with Lima, taxi for VFR departure.
Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, runway 24, taxi via Alpha.
Runway 24 via Alpha, 7 Sierra Mike, thanks. Okay, run-up is complete. Pre-takeoff checklist. Beacon is on, nav lights on, strobe on, and landing light on. Radios are set. Switch to tower frequency and go ahead and dial in approach, even though we won't need them for several minutes. We'll be calling them for flight following on 127.3. Palomar Tower, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, ready for departure. Straight out, please.
So 757 Sierra Mike, Palomar Tower, runway 24, clear for takeoff, straight out departure approved.
Clear for takeoff, runway 24, straight out approved. 7 Sierra Mike, thanks. Approach is clear. .80 knots, rotate. Positive rate, gear up.
Says 737 Hotel Yankee, Montgomery Tower, runway 28 left, cleared for takeoff, left closed, traffic approved, wind 220 at 7.
Back to 26 inches.
Sky K3 uniform, turn left to Foxtrot, contact ground point 6. We're 7 Sierra Mike, frequency change approved.
Frequency change approved. 7 Sierra Mike. And let's go ahead and identify Seal Beach. And that's identified. We're waiting now to intercept the Seal Beach 308 radial, which will be coming in on our HSI down here. And we're climbing to 4,500 feet, 1,500 to go. Our climb checklist, our airspeed is between 120 and 140 knots. We've got power back to 24 inches. And RPM at about 2,600, which is set. And our fuel flow is adjusted for about 7.8 gallons per hour, 78 gallons per hour. Actually, that's pounds per hour on this aircraft.
Seven Hotel Yankee, runway 28 left, cleared for the option.
We're coming up on our radial, not quite there yet. Go ahead and start the turn so the intercept isn't quite so bad. We'll turn to about say 280. $200 feet to go. And there's our cruise altitude. Level off and let the plane accelerate, and then we'll do our cruise checklist. Go ahead and turn and track the Seal Beach 308 radial now.
One 1125 Yankee Roger, radar server, contact Santa Maria Tower, and squawk 1200.
And let's go ahead and get our cruise checklist done now. We want power at between 15 and 25 inches. We'll bring it down to about 23.
7 Hotel Yankee will be 3 of them.
And we're RPM anywhere between 22 and 2600. We'll bring it back just a little bit now to make it just a little quieter in the cockpit. And
No 1125 Yankee, center ramp.
I'll lean our mixture a bit. Hey, it's a good fuel flow there. Cruise checklist complete.
1125 Yankee, roger, proceed straight in, runway 30, report 2 mile final.
Go ahead and give SoCal a call now and get flight following dialed up. They'll be on 127.3. And we are about 7 miles southwest actually of the Oceanside VOR. SoCal departure, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike with their VFR request.
For 757 Sierra Mike, SoCal departure, go ahead.
SoCal departure, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, 7 miles west of the Oceanside VOR, level 4,500, like flight following to the Torrance Airport.
7 Sierra Mike, roger, block 7233.
7233, 7 Sierra Mike.
For 7 Hotel Yankee, runway 28 left, clear for the option.
Go ahead and turn now direct towards Dana Point, which is just visible off the nose. And looking off to our right just a little bit.
King Air 59 Mike, roger, hold short of Alpha.
That's the San Onofre power plant, which means we are almost clear of...
Air 59 Mike, cut at ground 125.9er.
We're almost clear of the restricted area now.
For 757 Sierra Mike, radar contact 10 miles southwest of Oceanside POR, maintain VFR.
7 Sierra Mike, maintain VFR, thanks.
No problems. And 7 Sierra Mike, change my frequency 127.2.
Your frequency 127.2. SoCal departure, 7 Sierra Mike made the switch.
7 Sierra Mike, thanks. Cessna 238 Kilo Alpha, Torrance altimeter 29er 8, runway 29er right's in use.
29er 8, Scott K. Kilo.
There's a San Onofre power plant, again, just off our wing now, so we are almost past the restricted area. This heading towards Dana Point. We are safely clear to the west of it.
Cessna 25 Yankee, runway 30, clear to land. Number 7 Hotel Yankee, runway... I'm sorry, did you request runway 28, right? Number 7 Hotel Yankee, roger, runway 28 left, clear to land. Number 238 Kilo Alpha, VFR traffic, 1 o'clock, 3 miles southeastbound, indicates 2,800.
Traffic inside Skycake Kilo.
And in just a little less than a minute, we'll make our left turn to proceed towards the Long Beach Harbor. Be a heading of about 288 to 290 degrees. And we can go ahead and make that turn now. So the just off the nose, slightly off to the right from this perspective, is Newport Harbor, and that is squarely in the Santa Ana class Charlie for John Wayne Airport. But since we are in
November 25 Yankee, contact ground 121.9.
Since we are in communication, have established and are maintaining communication with air traffic control, we do not have to worry about the Class C. They will take care of the transition, since they are actually the responsible party for that airspace. They know we will be going through it.
November 737 Hotel Yankee, contact Montgomery ground 118.22. And 7 Hotel Yankee, you did pass, and congratulations.
We've got Catalina Island just behind the pillar out there.
Seven 8 Kilo Alpha, traffic 2 o'clock, and 5 miles northwestbound, type unknown, altitude indicates 3,500, appears to be descended.
Traffic inside for Skycake Kilo.
Massive land just about the 11 o'clock, perhaps 11:30 position is Palos Verdes Peninsula. Torrance Airport is on the east side of that little rise of land that we'll see. Airport is pretty much directly in front of us now. Just visible there out at about the 2 o'clock, moving slowly to the 3 o'clock position is the John Wayne Airport. A good altitude for us to be at once.
8 Kilo Alpha, additional traffic 12 o'clock, 4 miles northbound, type unknown, altitude indicates 3,000 unverified.
We have the traffic 8 Kilo Alpha.
So go ahead and see if we can receive the localizer for Torrance Airport yet. That's on 111.9er. We'll verify we're receiving that. And not quite yet, it sounds like, so we'll just leave our Nav1 radio on, so we'll hear the Morse code as soon as we are within range. Good altitude for us to be at as we cross over Long Beach Harbor will be about 2,000 feet, and we will start that descent after we're towards the end of the Charlie and a little bit closer. Okay, we're now receiving, looks like, the localizer. And indeed, that's the identifier. Might as well go ahead and get the ATIS for Torrance Airport. That's on 125.6. But we will let center know we're going to temporarily change frequencies. SoCal approach, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, like to leave the frequency for a moment to check the Torrance ATIS.
Cessna 7 Sierra Mike, roger, report back up.
7 Sierra Mike, will do, thanks.
November 8 Kilo.
Torrance Airport information, Bravo, 0000 Zulu. Wind calm, visibility greater than 20 miles. Sky condition, few clouds at 6,000. Temperature 15.5, altimeter 2992, ILS. Runway 29er, right and visual. Runway 29er, left in use. Landing and departing, runway 29er, right and runway 29er, left. VFR aircraft say direction of flight. All aircraft read back hold short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact, you have Bravo.
SoCal approach, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike's back up with Bravo.
November 238 Kilo Alpha, Torrance Tower, good evening. Make straight in, runway 29er right, wind 2306, altimeter 299 right.
That radio call was Torrance Tower for a different aircraft.
November 7 Sierra Mike, SoCal approach right.
In real life, we probably wouldn't have heard that call, but now we know that there's another airplane flying the same approach to Torrance Airport that we're hoping for. We're 21 miles out from the Torrance Airport. We'll go ahead and wait just a little longer before we start our descent. And we can go ahead and start it. SoCal approach, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike. We're going to start our descent down VFR down to 3,000 feet now.
November 7 Sierra Mike, roger, maintain VFR.
7 Sierra Mike, roger. Go ahead and make a little left turn to intercept the localizer. We're not flying an instrument approach, so we don't really need the localizer, but it's pretty handy as a nav aid on this heading since it will lead us right to the Torrance Airport. SoCal, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, we're going to take it all the way down to 2,000.
November 7 Sierra Mike, roger. Report Torrance Airport inside 12 o'clock and 12 miles.
7 Sierra Mike, we're looking for it. Might not see it for another mile or so.
Number 8 Kilo Alpha, wind 230 at 6, runway 29 right, clear to land.
Again, situational awareness is a good thing. That airplane is cleared to land in front of us for the same runway that we're hoping to get cleared for.
Says the 7-0 Mike, traffic 9 o'clock, 4 miles eastbound, type unknown, altitude indicates 3,500.
7-0 Mike looking, and Torrance Airport is in sight.
November 7-0 Mike, roger. November 7-0 Mike, previously issued traffic, no factor, appears to be turning southbound, contact Torrance Tower 124.0, connect.
Tower in 124.0, good day, thanks a lot. Torrance Tower, Cessna 7570 Mike, Queensgate, inbound with Bravo.
Number 7570 Mike, Torrance Tower, good evening. Make straight in, runway 29 right. Traffic you're following is the Skyhawk on a 2-mile final.
Traffic in sight, Cessna 70 Mike, and we're making a straight in. Flaps 10. Gear down. That's the outer marker. Flaps 20. Our pre-landing checklist. Your mixture is rich. Propellers are high RPM. Airspeed 90 knots. Gear is down and locked. Pre-landing checklist is complete. We're on about a 3-mile final now. I see that traffic has not yet left the runway. This could be interesting.
Number 70 Mike, wind 230 at 6, runway 29 right, clear land number 2.
29 right, clear to land. 70 Mike. Torrance Cessna 70 Mike, is that traffic ahead of us clear the runway?
Number 70 Mike, negative, none at this time. November 8 Kilo Alpha, expedite exit into runway traffic on short funnel.
Making our next left, 8 Kilo Alpha.
November
7 Sierra Mike is going around.
November 7 Sierra Mike, enter right traffic, runway 29 right, report midfield on downwind.
Right traffic, 29 right, and we'll report downwind. Thanks. Torrance Towers, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, midfield.
November 7 Sierra Mike, wind 230 at 6, runway 29 right, clear land.
Clear land, 29 right, 7 Sierra Mike. Don't normally get to hear that twice on the same runway approach.
Over 6 Juliet Golf, turn left heading 110, proceed direct LAX, resume, join Victor 64.
Torrance Tower, Cessna 757 Sierra Mike, clear of runway 29 right.
32 Los Angeles Class Bravo airspace, maintain a VFR at or below 3,000, on departure, flighting 250. Departure frequency 124.5, squawk 7041. November 7 Sierra Mike, taxi to parking this frequency.
Taxi to parking this frequency, 7 Sierra Mike, thanks. And that's our flight. With the modest exception of the go-around to avoid the Cessna 172 that was a bit slow to clear the runway, the flight went exactly as we planned it from start to finish. Notice that the Charlie transition was a complete non-issue. The fact that we crossed through the Charlie airspace never even came up since we were continuously in communication with ATC. Make sure you watch Keith's workshop number 4, which covers VFR flights that depart from Class Charlie and Class Bravo airports. And as always, have fun on the PilotEdge network.